Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Diversability Amplified, the podcast where we elevate disabled lives together by sharing the stories of our community. This is Katherine Lewis, the content manager for our Diversability team, and I'm really excited both as a disabled person and as a disabled veteran for this week's episode, where we're going to be highlighting the unique experience of the disabled veteran in our community. We have an amazing guest, Krystal, today, who's going to be talking about her experience and her identity as a disabled veteran and all the work that she does in this community. Before we get started, I would really love to have you introduce yourself and give our listeners and our viewers a little bit of an idea about who you are. Before we turn it over, I am a Caucasian woman with medium length dark hair, and I am in my office as I am every week, accompanied by all of my lovely teaching materials. Krystal, thank you so much for being here. Can you introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners and let them know a little bit about who you are?
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. As you said, my name is Krystal. I am an Army veteran living with several medical conditions, invisible ones, fibromyalgia, IBS, arthritis, degenerative disc disease, and a whole bunch of others that were triggered or caused by my military service. I am a Caucasian woman with long blonde hair and blue eyes, and I am in my home office, and neutral light cream color walls with some vintage looking farm style decor and some fresh lavender in the mason jars on my wall. And I want to also point out I have a lovely wooden plaque on my wall that a friend of mine made and engraved, and it has a purple butterfly and it says Fibro Warrior on it. So I wanted to share that too, because it's like in the heart of my office, and it keeps me going when I have those bad days. So look at it and go, okay, I can do this.
Thank you, Krystal, so much for that introduction. Can you, before we kind of talk about what it's like to be a disabled veteran and really dive into that unique experience, can you tell us a little bit about your organization and your work as you are a business owner, I understand. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and your advocacy and what brought you to that work that you do?
Well, so I wouldn't say I'm a business owner, but I am for Savvy Cooperative, I am a co-owner. When they started, I bought some shares. It's a patient-driven organization that helps find work from home contract jobs for individuals with different medical conditions and disabilities. And they've been very inclusive of the veteran and military community, which I appreciate. And that's why I decided to join them. So a little bit of background. I am the founder of the Fibromyalgia Pain Chronicles and Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia. And a lot of people think that my advocacy started because I developed fibromyalgia and being a military veteran and advocating on veteran issues. But my background really is going back to my childhood. Is when I was 8 years old is when I first put my advocacy hat on, because my brother, at the time he was 5, he was diagnosed with leukemia. He was extremely ill, not responding to traditional chemo. And they tried basically experimental treatment, which worked. But later on, at the age of 17, he developed cardiomyopathy, and it was very severe, and he needed a heart transplant. Unfortunately, he didn't end up being a recipient. He passed away at 25. So I spent a lot of time growing up in the healthcare system, having to go to the appointments and everything for my brother, to, as I got older, becoming a caregiver and advocate for him. And then starting in college, I started working in the social services, human services field, working with individuals with intellectual disabilities and mental health conditions. And I did that for over 20 years. After I graduated college, I enlisted in the Army, and I was with a combat support medical hospital. And even after my injuries rendered me non-deployable and they had to discharge me, a medical discharge, I stayed on with my unit because I was in during September 11th, and knowing that they were going to get deployed, I stayed on and reinvigorated the family readiness group to be an extension of our unit that provided information, helped the soldiers get ready for deployment. For your listeners, if you are military personnel, let's say you're a single parent, you have to get paperwork in place for someone to be the guardian of your kid or kids when you're deployed. So I did a lot of that stuff, plus put educational and supportive services together for families of soldiers who were being deployed, along with upstarted a food pantry for those soldiers in my unit who were struggling financially and struggling with nutrition sustenance. And then I worked in the social services field, and as the years progressed, so did my injuries and my fibromyalgia. And in 2014, I got to the point where I was really sick, and I had lost a lot of weight. And my doctors had told me, like, if you keep working and you keep going at this pace, you will have to use a wheelchair. So those are your choices. You got to quit working before you make yourself even worse than what you are now, or that will be your path in life. So I ended up having to stop working and applied for disability benefits, and I was approved. And with all of my backgrounds and listening to the veteran community's stories of like having difficulty accessing healthcare and getting what they need through the VA, and the fibromyalgia community and chronic pain community having difficulties with finding doctors who understand our illness, providing supportive treatment with dignity and respect, I parlayed into advocating on behalf of the veteran and fibromyalgia communities and chronic pain and traumatic brain injury and PTSD, because I felt that I had this skill set and this voice, and that I could hopefully help someone or many someones on their journey through their healthcare path. And that's kind of how I came to fruition.
That's such an interesting story of like all the different layers of what motivates you and the inspiration from your childhood, and then the lived experiences that you had in and after the service. I want to dive right into this challenging question. I think a lot of us in the disabled community can relate to an identity crisis, especially those of us who were not born disabled, but become disabled later in life, as most of us veterans, do. That's our path. We were not born disabled because that would render us unable to serve. So we were non-disabled before we went into the service, and then we become disabled afterwards. And, a lot of disabled people kind of go on this identity journey of accepting and embracing life as a disabled person. But I think being a disabled veteran adds a layer to that of coming to terms with and accepting and embracing the identity as a disabled veteran. How did being a veteran shape and affect the acceptance journey for you of becoming, a pridefully disabled person, or embracing your identity as a disabled person?
Well, I mean, one of the things with being in the military and a veteran is we always have this mindset where we don't talk a lot. Most of us don't talk a lot. And that does have its own set of issues that can lead to not getting the help you need. And we can be our own barrier, right? But in the same token, there is this mentality in the military, like you suck it up and you drive on, and you don't talk about a lot of things, and you need to soldier up, or you need, there is that mentality. And then we do carry it into civilian life, and it can be both toxic, but also it can be a blessing, because if you can move past the toxicity in that statement and use it to kind of motivate how you're going to redefine yourself with what you got, and how you're going to metaphorically reframe how you approach things and live life, but still have that mentality or that drive to do it, but also understand and respect the fact that you will have to do things differently. That can be helpful. But a lot of military veterans get stuck in the phase before finding a way to reframe our thinking, but still tap into what we've learned and our strengths and applying it to the new situation we're living, or new circumstances. A lot of veterans get stuck in that, and that can be a huge identity crisis for veterans, which compounds things like the suicide rates and depression, anxiety, and PTSD. So yeah, and with my story, you see there's a lot of layers or labels. One of the things with myself is that I've had a very fortunate upbringing where I've had a lot of strong females around me who were well opinionated, even if they're wrong at times, including myself. I, growing up, never felt I lived with a label, even with my brother being terminally ill. It wasn't like, oh, it's so sad, her brother's so sick, or oh, she has such a responsibility at so young. My mom was very cognizant about not creating different layers of who I was as a person, and really allowed me to explore who I was as a child and a teenager and a young adult. And that is so very rare. And so for myself, I realized, yeah, I lived this aspect of my life as a sibling with someone who was terminally ill, along with being a caregiver. I also lived this aspect of my life where I was in the military, and then I was a veteran that was disabled. And then I lived this aspect of my life where I was working in social services and human services, supporting individuals with their healthcare journeys. And then now there's this aspect of my life that I'm living with several disabilities. And that's how I look at it. It's the thing with life is it always changes. That's the one constant. And one minute things could be great, and the next minute it could not even be chronic illness. It could be a loss of a loved one that you're close to, and you experience that cycle of grief and develop depression, anxiety, and even PTSD from being a caregiver for someone who was sick. Or we have an accident, our financial situation can change. And so there's so many variables in life that anyone could become a part of our community. I guess I'm kind of like the diamond in the rough, or just the rare instance where I've never took on labels in my life and used that to identify myself with. Because I'm many things. There, even with hobbies and stuff that I have accomplished and mastered in the past, those are hobbies and who I was at the time, and then I move on to something new. And so I guess I've worn many hats in life, and I'm not saying that it took me a minute to get comfortable having to shift from a fully able person to someone living with several disabilities that impacted my lifestyle, my social life, my financial circumstances. But you have to sit down and have that hard look at your life and how you're going to manage it, and try to do the best that you can, and realize that you still have value, and you just kind of reframe and look at other skill sets that you can do and develop of value and joy and positivity and support and education and awareness that you can put out in the world. If that kind of makes sense. I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for, but
no, that, I talk to, so many different people in the disabled community, and everybody views their own identity differently. And I think that's one of the really awesome things about our community and about identity itself, that some fully embrace the label and have, kind of reclaimed those labels and wear them with it like a badge of honor. And others, like you, choose not to live with labels and choose rather to, see themselves as multifaceted, multi-layered beings, rather than, embrace or deny or do anything with those labels. And that's what I think makes, the disabled journey so unique. And our community so vibrant, because everybody sees it differently. So that was an awesome answer. I think that a lot of our listeners can identify with, that tug of, do I want to embrace a label? How do I feel about a label? And, at the end of the day, whether we embrace those labels or not, we're all multifaceted beings, and we're more than the label, even if we choose to embrace it. I'm one of those people that wears my identity as a disabled veteran with a certain level of pride. I served my country. I really enjoyed my time in the service. I learned a lot. I did a lot of things. I was shaped tremendously as a human being, from the time that I spent in the service. And I feel an attachment to that part of my life, right? I think so many of us attach certain parts of our identity to very profound periods of life. For me, that was a very profound period of my life where I felt very at home doing what I did, and, being taken from that and having the requirement to reframe myself as a human being was actually the most difficult part. For others, it's, a liberating experience. It's so vastly different. Can you tell us a little bit about what the experience of going from service to being disabled and having that complete juxtaposition, just like I do, that when we're in the service, there's such an emphasis put on, physical ability. And I use quotation marks there because that's such an odd term to, physical ability is such a subjective thing, but there's such an emphasis and I would almost say an over-reliance on it. Although we all know that it's a very important thing to the mission, but having that, lived and breathed and emphasized every single second of every single day, physical fitness and being mission ready and all of the things that come with the reliance on the physical ability, and then really not having that anymore. For me, I know was a huge eye-opening experience. What was that like for you?
So, yeah, I mean, and not to say that when something happens so quickly, it's not a culture shock. I know for myself, it literally wasn't like overnight. It was just this progression over time. So, consciously, I might not have noticed some of the certain tally points where things were changing physically or whatnot. And yes, the thing about the military is there is a lot of emphasis on physical capability, because there's a lot of things outside of just how many push-ups you can do and how long you can run. It's that it is a skill set that's needed with the jobs in the military. Even if you're an admin, like I was with the combat support hospital, we literally, would have to put up and take down our hospital.
Right.
And so that physicality is a major, part of the job. And then to go from that to like now, so many years later, where I'm like, I just vacuumed and I need to take a nap. Yeah, that's a huge change. It is a huge change, and it's frustrating. It's, in the sense of, yeah, there are moments where you look back and I'm like, I used to like, basically it's like kind of like hiking, but we would call it humping with
Yeah.
with an 80-pound rucksack on her back, which is a really big like duffel bag or backpack, to, man, I could barely carry the vacuum up the stairs, and
Right.
so how do I circumvent that? I'm just gonna I'm gonna purchase a vacuum to have upstairs and one downstairs, and save those, because there's days I just can't do it. And I have 2 dogs, and I can't, being in the military, we're a bit OCD on some things. Like, we like away, and we love pets and we love our things, but we don't like the dust and we don't like the dog fur. Me, I don't. So that's why I was like, I have to have a vacuum upstairs and one downstairs, because I would get frustrated with the dog hair. So, and again, that's a way of like kind of creative accommodating, in a sense. Like, you learn what you need to do over time. And like I said, sometimes it's one of those things where I just remember going shopping with my mom, and just like after 40 minutes being like, I'm done, I can't do it anymore. But back in the day, I would go take my dogs out on the weekend and go hiking 5-10 miles like it was nothing.
Right.
So yeah, again, it's just one of those things where a lot of changes happen that are drastic. And again, it's one of the things that is, I don't want to say I don't understand, but it's not necessarily relatable or parallels someone where they were fine 1 minute and then the next minute they woke up and they were seriously sick with something or had a serious injury.
Right.
It was kind of like my life path kind of was like the warm-up session for what was going to come, and not realizing, not realizing that it was going to progress the way it was. So that's what's, different compared to other people in our community, where some people it's overnight, and that shock and that change is way more, can be way more detrimental to adjust to, and you're trying to adjust to a million things at once, where in my circumstance, I had some time to adjust and I had some time to accommodate and think outside the box. And so then it's not in the forefront of my mind about how I used to do all this in the military or do this in my job every day, and now I can't carry the vacuum up the stairs. It was like a slow progression where it's one of those things you look for myself. It's like looking back with hindsight going, yeah, I used to do 100 push-ups. Now I'm like, I'm like, I have a hard time carrying a bag of groceries in the house, and it's kind of, I look back at those things, but I have a really weird sense of humor. So I kind of learned to laugh at it and go, well, and make jokes and that's a coping mechanism for myself. But also, again, it's part of that reframing your thinking so I don't get stuck in what I used to do, if that makes sense. Like,
and that is so easy to do, especially for those of us who, who disability came into our lives, later in life. Those of us who were not born with disability, that comparison cycle can be very, very real. And I think a lot of us have spent some time at least in that cycle at one point or another. It's part of that acceptance process, because it is a big life change for those of us who are having to get used to life as disabled people. You talked about how that mindset in the military can sometimes get us stuck. and can sometimes be a hang up because there is that reliance and that emphasis on, the physical ability and the physical demand of the job. But I also want to talk to you a little bit about how the mindset in the military can also help us and be an asset to us. I remember when I was in the Army, we always talked about, adapt and overcome, that tagline that all of us heard, adapt and overcome, adapt and overcome. How did that mindset and that adaptability become an asset to you, or did it become an asset to you about, the kind of ways that we do things in the military about, you always find a way? Has that shaped you now that you're on the other side at all as a disabled person?
So I think that, being in the military, we have to be able to adapt on our feet for any situation and realize that if plan A is not going to work, we got to try plan B, C, D, all, and having that, mindset kind of drilled into us, because in the military you'll do training exercises to prepare you for things that will go awry, because it's never we know nothing in life is perfect, and we could plan anything and there's always some little thing that comes up that decided not to go with the plan, and do you get stuck on that little point, or do you figure out, okay, how do I work with this? And that's kind of what the military is about, is that didn't go to plan, how do I work with this? And learning to think on your feet and adapt, and it literally becomes like second nature. Like, you're not necessarily thinking out a new strategic plan, you're at a lot of times adapting as you go. We see a lot of that with those individuals who have been in combat, that you could have every possible contingency plan, and something can happen and none of it's going to work, and you got to think on your feet. And I think that that innate skill set that they tap into us as human beings, because we have that innate skill set, going back to our ancestors and whatnot, and the military has figured out a way to hone that so that we could think on our feet when those situations come up. And so having the opportunity to learn to strengthen that skill set by being in the military has certainly helped with living my life now. And I think that, without having that experience, my mindset could have been really different from the get-go. It could have been a different situation, a different story, and of what my journey was. So yeah, I would say that is a silver lining of the military, is having that experience and learning that skill, because you can apply it to anything in life, because nothing is perfect. I mean, look at people who have kids. I mean, if there was an easy way and a handbook for kids, there wouldn't be thousands of books on how to raise kids, or, parenting styles, or, and that's what I'm saying, having kids is a constant contingency plan. Like, you got, and that's what I tell people who've not been in the military. I'm like, you got kids, you're adapting and coming up with different contingency plans, like every second of the day. That's like how it is in the military. It's just different variables.
It's just a different, setting. It's a different setting with the same skill set. Mm-hmm. And I know for me, it was a huge silver lining for me to be able to know that, okay, yeah, this is new, this is different, this is difficult in a lot of ways, but I know that I can adapt this. You talked about, figuring out a way to vacuum your house. Was it ideal? Maybe, maybe not. You can pick which one you think it was, but you figured out a way that worked for you. And that's a skill set that so many of us learn in the service and also out. But I know for me, it was like so drilled in that it really became a huge advantage for me as I was, kind of finding my way after service. A lot of us, after we get out, we talk a lot about, like veteran unemployment rate and veteran, all of these statistics, of what it's like after service. And I consider myself very fortunate that I didn't experience a lot of that, because I felt very empowered to adjust the way I needed to in order to find my path. And I know that a lot of people in and out of the service have that experience. I kind of want to shift gears a little bit. We've talked a lot about what it's like living with disability and what it was like, going from the service and how that's become, shaped your experience now. But I want to talk a little bit about what it's like for you to continue to work on behalf of veterans and veteran initiatives. What has that been like, and how has your own experience kind of shaped that advocacy that you do on behalf of our community?
I want to point out I'm fortunate that I had a lot of advocacy skill sets and understanding, because I worked in social services all the years I did. So, I was doing advocacy for my patients and advocacy for organizations that, represented or supported a community. And in some ways, I had built some relationships with like local representatives, or I've learned the systems from a local and state and federal level on who to go to and what. So that makes it easier, because a lot of people don't know, like when you start, especially with veteran initiatives, people don't know what is the system, what is the pathway when you're trying to address certain things, and who are the correct people to go to, and how to maximize, the veteran community voices, and think about all the tools you can use to amplify an issue and garner support. So yeah, some people, veterans will have issues with the VA healthcare system, and they'll call their mayor or the state governor, which the state governors can have some assistance, but the VA it's federal. It's in its own world, and you need to understand that, so that you're building those relationships and tailoring advocacy initiatives towards the right powers to be, for lack of a better term. I will say that advocating on behalf of the veteran community is much more difficult than it is for the non-veteran communities, because there's a lot of stuff in non-veteran communities that you could advocate for and address on a local or state or regional systems level, where everything with the VA, it typically is federal. And trying to open those doors. The other, to get your champions who are going to help you address this issue, or put this legislative, bill in place, or change some policy at the VA. It's very heady. It's very heady, and you have to, as someone living with disabilities or chronic conditions, in the veteran space, you really have to be stringent with your time and take those breaks, because it's not easy. And then the veteran community, military community, are what I call my strong but silent warriors. They don't, it's a, I want to, I guess characteristic of our community is that we are very, quiet. And so you have to work on not just building relationships on the advocacy initiative level for the people that can help you bring about or emote the changes you need to positively impact the veteran community, you also have to mobilize and motivate and build trust within the veteran community, so that when you have an ask of them, like, can you please email your senators? Can you please share this? You have to be a trusted and credible, person to them. So there's a lot of relationship building within the veteran community so that you can, get them to support you, because the numbers is really what changes things and creates positive actions of change. And so it's a two-way street. You're trying to convince your lawmakers and your community, like, we can do this, like, we have the numbers, but you also have to teach people how to do it. You can't just say, can you call your I literally break things down when it comes to legislative and policy advocacy. I literally break things down. I'll say, if you're not comfortable with calling, here's a write-up that you can copy and paste, and here's the link to your representatives.
Right.
I give them everything, and then I invite them on calls or events where, some of our legislators might be at. And you'd be surprised when you give the tools. You have to give people the tools and the education in order for them to help with the initiative. It's unrealistic to expect someone to do something that they've never done before, and you're just like, I need your support, call your senator, and just leave it at that. No, it's like, you gotta kind of lay the brickwork.
You gotta break those barriers.
Break the silos, and then try to marry, like, the fibromyalgia community, trying to marry the veteran and non-veteran communities together to be one voice on issues related to fibromyalgia. So yeah, you have to be willing to really look at all the different levels that you have to create to get into that space and create those relationships and bring people to the table, and also connect people together, and not just network for yourself, but network and bring, different people to the table so that they can network and build their relationships too. And that's really what community is about. Threading or knitting a community. If you don't do those first steps, you're not going to get to where you need to go. But it's hard. I'm not going to lie. I'm not, a lot of people follow me on social media and they're just like, how do you get this stuff done? I'm like, there's a lot of work in the background behind the scenes, like, and it's hard. And you have to really understand that when you're doing that type of advocacy, it's a long road. Things aren't going to happen overnight. And I collaborate with so many advocates, and I'll be like, I know you want this right now, and we deserve to have this right now. But the reality of it is that's not going to happen. So we got to work with what we got and make the best of it, maximize it, build interest, build momentum, use social media space in a proactive and manner to get people to pay attention. So it's a multi-level, multi-layer, many variables that you have to really, accomplish and engage in order to do that type of advocacy in the veteran community. But fibromyalgia, any community really. So yeah, and people are always like, I'll come out with an initiative, or I'll say, hey, and throw out on social media advocacy I've done with, like, my state senators to bring a veteran issue to light and advocate. And I would do it for months. Like, hey, we need to expand, or we need to include burn pit exposure conditions for veterans exposed to burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan and other parts of the world. And then I finally get a response, and then my elected officials are like, okay, we're going to support, or we're going to sponsor this legislative bill. And then I'll share that information and that communication on social media. But what people don't realize is that was like a year in the making of me constantly reaching out, constantly talking, sending emails, making phone calls, soliciting and telling my friends and family, hey, call Senator so let's just influx their office one week with a bunch of calls.
Right. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right?
Right. So yeah, that's the other thing that people need to understand, regardless veteran issues, non-veteran issues. It's a long road. And so you have to be smart about it, and you gotta be realistic about it. And you have to take your time, not just with that initiative, but with yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself on that long journey, you're going to burn out and you're going to make your medical health worse. So yeah.
It's definitely, it sounds like there's a lot to balance, which, you know, with advocacy, you know, a lot of our listeners are advocates themselves too. So I'm sure that everything that you just said resonates. You know, it is definitely a long road. You know, what you said, we deserve to have things now. You know, we deserve to have equity and accessibility and inclusion right now, but the world we live in isn't an instant process, unfortunately. But it, you know, your tenacity definitely pays off, and it, you know, it's definitely has, you know, for you and the work that you're doing. I want to talk, you know, kind of segue this. You talked a little bit about, you know, how veteran initiatives can sometimes feel like their own beast and their own kind of multifaceted and kind of sometimes overwhelming process with a lot of, you know, federal red tape and its own very, you know, complex system, just like the non-veteran disabled community. The advocacy there can often feel very overwhelming and feel like its own beast too. And I think sometimes, you know, I've talked to a lot of disabled veterans who feel like they're kind of like their own little sub community within the larger community of the disabled community. And, you know, we're talking about Veterans Day, and within the larger context this month of the disabled community and elevating our voices together. Do you have an opinion on how, you know, to kind of bridge that gap and really bring both of those groups and within the disabled community together, you know, for the same, you know, collective initiative? You do a lot of that already for yourself. What would your advice be to the larger communities of both groups to help bridge that gap together, to be really one voice rather than feeling so separate?
Well, that's something that I've worked on for quite a few years, and it goes back to establishing relationships. Be willing to support someone else's initiative. If you have no, you know, stake in the game, it doesn't matter. I mean, why wouldn't you want another community to succeed? I have always been a bridge builder, if for lack of a better term. I like to bring everybody to the table. I collaborate with people from a variety of communities. From, yeah, I've done awareness videos and initiatives, and I'll collaborate with someone with a rare disease. I'll collaborate and include both veterans and non-veterans to discuss what it's like, their journey living with chronic pain. I will create conversations and again, awareness initiatives and videos where I have, you know, invisible disability awareness. And I go to everyone I know and tap a lot of different individuals and say, hey, I want to do this. I want to show how, let's take the label off. Let's take off the diagnosis that we all live with. Let's talk about the symptoms and all the parallels, because that's our golden thread that connects us. And one of the mistakes we make with not working together, whether if it's between like veterans and non-veterans or different advocates of different communities, is we get kind of tunnel vision. And we focus on, and I'll be like, okay, take those metaphorical tunnel goggles off, take them off, take the name of your diagnosis off the table. Let's sit in a group discussion with a variety of different people with different life experiences, different conditions. Let's just talk about the symptoms we all experience, and let's write down how many similarities. Okay, great. Wow, we have a lot of symptoms that overlap between a variety of conditions, from rare diseases to chronic pain conditions, invisible disabilities, cancer, mental health. It's all there. Okay, now let's talk about all the similarities and differences our life paths are. So my experience as a female veteran, I went in after college. I had a college degree. I chose not to go in as an officer. I went in as enlisted. But guess what? As a female going into the military with a degree, a lot of similarities with my female counterparts who don't have a degree, but it's still a different path because I had that college degree. And then because I had that college degree and decided to go enlisted, my experience is going to be different than the female officers who went in as officers with a degree. So we have a lot of similarities there. First, we're all female, right? But you see all the similarities and then you see all the differences. And then you got to recognize and appreciate that those differences really do matter, and you have to meet each other where we're at. And we have to celebrate those differences because those differences create unique skill sets and perspectives from a variety of people that can really help and positively impact an issue you want to address. And that's my big thing is, I have some friends that have lupus. They need help calling, their Congress leaders. Yeah, I'll call. I don't have lupus. I'll lend my voice because guess what? We have a lot of similarities we deal with our conditions.
Right.
Chronic pain, chronic fatigue, brain fog. No, I don't have cancer. My brother had leukemia. Yeah, you want me to help you and make some calls when you're doing this rally for colon cancer? 100%. Just let me know and I'll be there. I'll make the call. Again, it's why not? We can't ask for help if we're not willing to help our colleagues in different communities.
I love that. I love that. Bridging that gap and cheering on our fellow advocates and our fellow disabled community. I love that. That's fantastic. And I think that that's a really profound way to kind of sum up not only the disabled veteran experience, but the disabled experience as a whole. We're all similar, we're all different. And if we work together, we can make it. We can make the things that we want to be reality possible.
100%. Our differences really maximize the outcome in a great way.
And if we are able and willing to highlight those in important ways by having conversations, sharing these stories, then we can help make those things possible. Krystal, I want to thank you so much today for being here today, highlighting your experience, your story, your path, and your life as a disabled veteran and an advocate. Is there anything you would like to share with our listeners before we sign off today?
I always like to, kind of leave some words of wisdom or just ideals that earlier before we jumped on, we were talking about self-care, and a lot of this, it comes into context with this discussion with, navigating our healthcare journey, our personal lives, advocacy, while living with a disability and chronic conditions. And I said one of the things we were talking about is if we don't carve out the time for ourselves, we're going to put ourselves in a whole world of hurt. We're going to go into flare up. And so we have to be cognizant of our wellness on our path and literally schedule and block out times to rest. And that we really need to love ourselves and love each other and make our self-care our number one priority, because if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to accomplish what we desire.
I love that. Thank you so much for those final words, and for being on today. And you guys, our listeners, can learn more about Krystal on the links that we're going to be dropping in the YouTube and social media channels. Follow her on IG and visit her channels. She's a phenomenal advocate and such a great asset to our community. Thank you for having this conversation with me. And to all of our listeners, thank you for being here. And we will see you next month for our next episode. So it won't end recording, but.
Yeah, I see that. I know mine was being